Welcome everybody to the Critical Antiquities workshop. This is our last one for the calendar year 2023. Before I introduce our distinguished guest, I want to acknowledge and pay respect to the elders of the traditional custodians of the land on which the universities that host the Critical Antiquities workshop sit. So for the University of Wollongong, that means the Darawal, Yuin and Wadi peoples. And for the University of Sydney, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Country is the essence of Indigenous cultures, and in Australia, country has nourished Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for many millennia. The finely honed relationships between all living things that Indigenous Australians had developed were awfully disrupted by British colonists who stole this land. Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded, and amends have not been made for the overwhelmingly destructive impact of colonialism on Indigenous peoples in Australia. Personally, I mourn this, and I mourn the fact that efforts to improve the situation have so far failed. But I do hope that something transformative and beneficial may still come, and I stand in solidarity with others who work to this end. So today we are very privileged to have Cinzia Arruzza with us. She is an associate professor of philosophy at the New School in New York City. She received her education in her native Italy, including the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, where she received her PhD. And she's held positions at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland and Bonn in Germany, where she was an Alexander von Humboldt postdoctoral fellow before taking up her place at the New School. Now, while Cinzia is an expert in ancient philosophy, and that will be the topic of her talk today, she's a lot more than a mere dusty academic. It's a great pleasure and refreshing to have someone who is not only distinguished as an academic, but who also is visibly active in political and social movements. So Cinzia has been active in the Sinistra Critica in Italy. She provides ongoing commentary on contemporary social and political movements in the International Viewpoint magazine that continues the work of the Fourth International set up by Leon Trotsky, exiled from Soviet Russia and holed up in France in 1938. Her publications reflect her interlocking intellectual and political identities. Beginning with the most recent, she's published the book Feminism for the 99%, a manifesto, which was co-authored with Tithi Bhattacharya and Nancy Fraser for Verso Books in 2019. She's also published a monograph, A Wolf in the City, Tyranny and the Tyrant in Plato's Republic, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. And Dangerous Liaisons, Marriages and Divorces of Marxism and Feminism, published by the Merlin Press in 2013. In addition to that, she has also co-edited with Dmitry Nikulin, Philosophy and Political Power in Antiquity, published by Brill in 2016. And she has published the book Plotinus, Aeneid 2.5, on what is potentially and what actually, which is a translation of this text with an introduction and commentary that was published in the Aeneads of Plotinus series, edited by John Dillon and Andrew Smith for the Parmenides Press in 2015. So with that brief overview, I'm sure everyone has a sense of just how fitting it is to have Cinzia at the Critical Antiquities workshop. And so we're delighted that she's generously agreed to share her time and her work with us today. The title of her paper for today is Sexual Difference in Question, the Justice of the First Wave in Plato's Republic. So please join me in welcoming Cinzia Arruzza.
Okay, thank you very much. I must clarify that I am a nerd. So I am a dusty academic. I'm proud of it. But I also, I re-entered the cave out of necessity, let's say. Okay. And what I'm going to present today is probably not exactly what one may expect, in the sense that I'm going to refer to some feminist interpretations of the first wave in the Republic. But my task for today's talk is rather like a reconstruction of the argument, how the argument in the first wave works. And this stems from some dissatisfaction with the existing interpretations of the argument, and also dissatisfaction with the kind of feminist debate that took place, from the 70s onward. around, Plato's feminism, let's say. And the dissatisfaction has to do with the fact that in many interpretations or critiques of this section of the Republic, very little attention was paid to a careful reconstruction of how the argument works, and let's say the polemical intent primed over the careful reading of the text. And in my view, this actually weakens a feminist critique of the text. So in other words, I am a strong believer in the fact that one has to first understand exactly what is going on in the text, giving a charitable reading, as much as possible. And so my goal today is to actually show that from a logical, philosophical viewpoint, the argument is sound, despite having been criticized as, muddled and unclear and nonsensical and so on. Whether this is satisfactory from a feminist perspective is a completely different matter. But I think that one can articulate a better feminist critique of the text once we actually understand, or try to have a better understanding and charitable reading of the text. This is the work I'm going to present is part of a book project I'm working on, which is titled Socrates Women, Virtue, the Soul, and Sexual Difference in the Socratic Circle and Plato's Dialogues. So this is basically part of a chapter in the book, and the book is structured in the following way. So first of all, the first two chapters are devoted to the other Socratics, and the reason I'm doing this is that in several, for example, feminist, but also criticism by ancient philosophy scholars of this argument, very little attention has been placed on the relationship between this argument and the Socratic debate on women, and the fact that, in fact, what Plato is presenting, by and large, is based on a shared Socratic tenet, which is that virtue is the same for men and women, and that at the level of the soul, in fact, there is no sexual difference, there is no relevant difference between men and women. So the first two chapters are devoted to Antisthenes, Aeschines, and Xenophon, in particular on the topics of virtue, women's virtue, and on the topic of marriage and the figure of Aspasia. And then the rest of the book is going to be devoted to Plato. So unfortunately, one chapter on the Republic has become two chapters now. So it's the book keeps multiplying chapters. And then I will have a chapter on Diotima and Aspasia, one chapter on the laws, and one on the Timaeus. So what I'm presenting is an analysis of the first wave. The first wave from book 5 of the Republic is the argument in favor of the inclusion of women in the class of guardians, both among the auxiliaries, and as we learn from book 7, also among philosopher rulers. And then the second chapter on the Republic will be devoted to the second wave, which is the abolition of the private family and the collectivization of the work of child education and child rearing. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that you can all see the handout. Where is it? Can you see it? Okay. So in the handout, I placed, let's say, the structure of the argument of the whole chapter, but I'm not going to address everything. Just briefly, in the first part of the chapter, I discuss, I have a long section discussing, this history of interpretations of this section of the dialogue, the misogyny in especially early interpretations, but not only early interpretations of the dialogue, and then problems in the feminist debate. And then the second section of the chapter has to do with responding to the reminding readers of the context of Socratic debates on women's nature and virtues, and then responding to, let's say, ironical readings or unserious readings of the argument of the first wave based on Socrates' repeated references to the danger of laughter, being ridiculed, and so on. And there I make the argument that, in fact, the references to laughter need to be understood together with the legal language adopted in this section of in the preliminary part of this section of the dialogue, and the combination of let's say references to comedy and references to court trials, indictment, being arrested, and so on, in my view, is an echo of the apology. And so I take this as an indication that, in fact, the argument that Socrates is presenting is a Socratic argument. Of course, it is Plato's version of a Socratic argument. And we don't know exactly what Socrates' own argument was. But I take it that, let's say I read it as in the opposite way as with respect to the ironical reading, in the sense that I think this all apologetic framework, makes clear that Socrates is presenting something really serious, so something he's really committed to. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on is a reconstruction of how the argument works. So starting from section 4 of the handout. Okay, I'm going to start with the prefaces to his argument in 454D, which is basically an objection that Socrates raises against himself. And the objection reads as following: then how is it that you are not making a mistake now and contradicting yourselves when you say that, on the contrary, women and men must do the same things despite having an entirely separate nature? As we will learn later, Socrates will describe these objections as heristical. This objection is based on a faulty interpretation of the principle of specialization, which Socrates presents in previous books, and then further clarifies in his discussion of civic justice in book 4. And according to the principle of specialization that we will discuss at length later, let's say, to give just a preliminary definition, the idea is that all people should be engaged only in the kinds of activities for which they have a natural vocation, and natural vocation depends on the soul. So it has to do with, let's say, the intellectual abilities of the soul, but also the moral makeup of the soul. So the specific ability to acquire virtues, or only some virtues, not others. In text number 5, Socrates first clarifies, let's say, what should be the method for addressing this heuristic objection. And he says, therefore I said, if the male and female sex, so the genus, appear to differ with regard to some art or another pursuit, we will say that this art or pursuit must be assigned to either of them. But if they appear to differ only in this, that the female sex gives birth while the male sex mounts, we will rather say that it has not yet been demonstrated that women differ from men with regard to what we are talking about. On the contrary, we will still believe that the guardians and their women need to have the same pursuits. So the methodological clarification has to do with rejecting the point made by the heristical interlocutor that men and women differ in nature in all possible respects, so that they have entirely separate natures. And what Socrates is arguing is that, in fact, we need to pay attention to where the difference should be located, first, and secondly, whether this difference, which is not denied by Socrates, as we will explain, whether this difference is relevant for the problem at stake. And the problem at stake is the public administration of the city, so guarding the city and politically ruling the city. In text number 6, Socrates also clarifies further the principle of specialization. Now, before we read this text, I need to clarify why this is important. On some readings of the first wave, it has been claimed that Socrates basically switches to a different meaning of the principle of specialization in this section of the dialogue. So in other words, while in previous books, the principle of specialization entails that one needs to have a natural talent to perform a certain kind of activity better than others. So in other words, that excellence is required in performing this kind of activity. Here in this section of the dialogue, Socrates is switching to another meaning of the principle of specialization, namely that among the various activities in which I, on an individual level, I can participate or I can engage, I will need to engage in the kind of activity where I can perform better with regard to the other activities I could perform. And this would mean that women, in this case, would not be really excellent at guarding the city or ruling the city, but let's say that they will be included in the class of guardians because they cannot do anything better than that. So among their subjective abilities, the set of abilities they have, this is what they can do best. But this doesn't mean that they excel over other people. And this interpretation has been given in order to explain a claim we will analyze later, according to which the female genus is weaker or inferior to the male genus in all respects. Now, the problem with this interpretation is that this is denied by text number 6. And again, this is really the methodological preface to the whole argument, in which Socrates is basically making clear that he doesn't want to contradict his argument about specialization or civic justice. And so what he's going to present in terms of women's inclusion need to be coherent with the argumentative arch so far of the dialogue. And in text number 6, he clarifies what the principle of specialization entails. And he says, were you saying that one is naturally endowed for something while another is not, in the sense that one would learn it easily, another with difficulty, and that one, after a brief instruction, would find out for himself or for herself more than what he has learned, while the other, after receiving much instruction and care, would not even retain what he has learned, and that in one, the body would adequately serve his thought, while in the other, it would oppose it. Now, the way Socrates is framing the principle of specialization is exactly the way he presented it earlier. So this has not, the principle of specialization doesn't have to do with what I'm able to do best among the various activities I may perform. So in other words, it cannot be the case that I'm terrible at farming or of being a doctor and so on, but I'm maybe better. Among the various things I can do is, guarding and managing weapons is the thing I can do best, and so on. But I may still be mediocre at doing this. This cannot be the case. So the requirement is that one has to be excellent. So the context is competitive. In other words, one has to demonstrate. So women, in order to be included in the class of guardians, must demonstrate that they have the ability to guard the city that all the producers of Callipolis do not have. And the women included in the class of philosopher rulers must have the ability to philosophize that the auxiliaries do not have. So in other words, they need to excel in this activity over the people who are excluded from this activity. Secondly, what Socrates is also clarifying is that this entails basically learning something with facility, with ease, rather than with difficulty. And this, as I will explain later, has extreme relevance with regard to the inclusion into the class of philosopher rulers. They need to have autonomy, intellectual autonomy, so be able to discover from themselves, in addition to what they learn from the teacher. And the third requirement is that the body needs to be adequate for serving the anoia. So the requirement is not that the body needs to be perfect, or that it needs to be the fittest body possible, or the strongest possible body. It needs to be adequate to the kind of activity at stake. And so in the case of the guardian class, and this applies, I would think, also to the philosopher rulers, because the philosopher rulers will be ultimately be selected from the guardians at large. This means to have a body that is adequate, fit enough to basically, wage war when it's necessary, guarding the city, defend the city, deal with the physical training that is required for the guardians. Okay, so this is let's say the requirements that Socrates is setting for his own argument. And so since Socrates has been quite clear about this, I am not persuaded by interpretation of the argument that is about to come, that basically make the argument incoherent with the requirements Socrates is setting for himself. This doesn't really make sense, because either Socrates is being just incoherent with himself without even realizing that he's doing this, or maybe there must be some hidden purpose in making Socrates incoherent, but I don't know what the purpose may be. I'm more convinced, let's say, by a straightforward interpretation, which is that Socrates is setting these high requirements of coherence, and this argument is going to make will need to meet these requirements. What is at stake, by the way, is really the definition of civic justice and so on. So it would be really a serious this deception of the readership and of the interlocutors if we were not coherent about this, because it would mean to deceive them on a crucial matter, crucial part of the argument of the Republic. So the argument starts in text number 7. And this is the text that has raised a lot of doubts and puzzled interpreters, and in my view, pushed interpreters to give various interpretations of what is going on that do not entail, that there is a real recognition of women's ability for guarding the city and philosophizing. So one interpretation is the one I mentioned, so this is changing the principle of specialization here. Another is that, in fact, Socrates is not applying the principle of specialization at all, and is actually including women in into the class of guardians out of eugenic reasons, based on the Hippocratic belief that acquired traits are hereditary, and so women need to receive, in order to produce good children, need to receive a certain kind of education, but this has nothing to do with their real ability to be guardians and philosopher rulers. So the text is strange, because one would expect, especially like from a feminist perspective, one would expect an argument of the kind that there are no male specialized, in the public sphere, there are no male specialized activities in which men excel over women in such a way as to exclude women from these activities. But Socrates, what Socrates said is the opposite. So this is why the argument is puzzling. What he says is, do you know of any human pursuit in which the male sex does not rank above the female sex in all these respects? Or shall we speak at length, mentioning the art of weaving or the preparation of cakes and boiled vegetables, in which the female sex is believed to be something, and where it is utterly ridiculous for the female sex to be inferior? So how to make sense of what is going on here? My suggestion is that the overarching problem Socrates is addressing is whether women and men should share exactly in the same education and exactly in the same roles within the public sphere. I take the dismissal of the preparation of cakes and boiled vegetables to indicate that what is at stake is not activities in the private domain, where women have been traditionally believed to be superior or to excel. What is at stake is the public domain. And I take this to govern the whole argument. So the problem is whether all public activities and public education should be shared in common exactly in the same way by men and women of the guardian class. So the first, in order to make this argument, to demonstrate this point, Socrates has to make two arguments. One is that there is no public sphere, or there is no activity in the public sphere where it would be legitimate or justified to exclude men and to include only women. And this probably has to do with the hypothesis that one may include women into the guardian class, but in order to perform some specific specialized women public activities. And this is something that happens, for example, in the laws. One could imagine, for example, performing certain kind of religious rites as the domain of women, or performing certain kinds of public tasks. So one may, even imagine like women being in charge of the education, the collective education of children, or being in charge of other aspects of the public life of the guardians. But this is what Socrates wants to exclude, because what he wants to argue for is the total koinonia of activities. So everything must be in common. Of course, at this stage, with text number 7, we don't still have an argument justifying the inclusion of women, obviously. We only have an argument showing that it would not be justified to separate some public activities only for women, from which men would need to be excluded, because this could be justified on the principle of specialization only by claiming that women are by and large that men are by and large inferior to women in these activities. So do we have an argument that actually works for the inclusion of women? In my view, we do have it, but we have it only if we take into account Glaucon's response. And so only if we don't take only Socrates' interventions as the argument, but we take the conversation between Socrates and Glaucon as the argument. Because Glaucon responds to Socrates in text number 8, "You say the truth," he said, "that one sex is far overpowered by the other in everything, so to speak. However, many women are better than many men in many pursuits," and notice the language, there is the insistence on many, many, many. "But on the whole, it is as you say." So the work that Socrates' intervention makes is to say that Socrates' claim about men's superiority is valid only at the level of the genus, but doesn't tell us the truth at the level of individuals. And in fact, based on experience, so this is an inductive argument as Socrates also a previous argument. Based on experience, we can see that many women, so not a few exceptions, but many women excel over many men and many pursuits. This indicates that while on the whole, Socrates is right, so at the level of the genus, this doesn't apply at the level of individuals. Now, of course, there has been some debate about how this may work, and some proposals about how we should interpret this, whether, the average man is superior to the average woman, or the very top men are superior to the very top women, but then the rest is not, or maybe like quantitatively, there are a greater number of superior men to. But the problem with all these attempts is that the claim is too underdetermined to really clarify what this means. In other words, a number of quantitative, let's say, configurations are possible, are allowed by the claim, because the claim is quite undetermined. But what is clear from Glaucon's intervention is that for a fact, the recognition of the superiority of the male genus has no bearings at the level of the assessment of individual abilities. And so the assessment about inclusion of women into the guardian class must be made on an individual level. So by assessing the individual vocation, talent, abilities, and also moral makeup or ability for virtue. So based on Glaucon's intervention, Socrates concludes the argument in text number 9 by saying, you say the truth. Then there is no pursuit among the ones concerned with the administration of the city, which is proper to a woman because she's a woman, or to a man because he's a man. But the natures are distributed in the same way in both living beings. And a woman partakes by nature in all pursuits in which man partakes, although in all, woman is weaker than man. So what Glaucon successfully showed, based on an inductive argument, so based on experience, what we can see is that it would not be, there is no specialized activity in the public sphere that where it would be justified to include only men but not women. So reconstructing this way, then the argument has these two steps. Text number 7 gives us the first step, which is that there is no public activity where it would be justified to exclude men and to include only women. So no specialized women tasks. And text number 8 gives us the second step of the argument. Insofar as we see that many women excel over many men, this shows that on an individual, what is true at the level of the genus is not true at the level of individuals. And so it would not be justified to have public activities where women are excluded and only men are included. I take, by the way, text number 8, so Glaucon's intervention, to really refer to the public sphere. So when he says many women are better than many men in many pursuits, I think we should add implicitly in the public sphere. And he may have in mind examples of that were examples under discussion in the Socratic circle of women warriors in the Black Sea, who excelled at war and riding horses, or foreign queens like Persian queens, who excelled at war and demonstrated great political wisdom, political art. Aspasia may be another example that he may have in mind in terms of intellectual abilities and so on. But I think it is referring to the public domain because in text number 7, Socrates has already made clear that we are not talking about baking cakes or boiling vegetables. So it would not make sense for Glaucon to make this, the point that, well, but I see that many women excel at boiling cakes or, rearing children or anything that happens traditionally within the, or, managing the budget of the household and so on. So reconstructing this way, I think the argument is sound. So it is a sound argument. It is coherent with the principle of specialization as restated in text number 6. So Socrates is not contradicting himself. He's actually applying the principle of specialization in the way he constructed in previous books. Now, there are a few other problems that we need to solve that have to do with what kind of inferiority Socrates has in mind of the genus, or the female genus. Now, we need, several interpreters have suggested that, in fact, women would not be justified in being included in the highest roles. That in fact they may be included in the class of guardians and auxiliaries, but they would not be excellent enough to be included in among the rulers and the philosophers. But this cannot hold, because we do have a text from book 7, which makes entirely clear that there will be philosopher queens. So this is text number 10 in the handout. So Socrates says, "And ruling women, Glaucon, I said, for you should not think that what I have said applies to men more than to women, at least to those among them who have been born with befitting natures." So this means that, what Socrates is referring to is the whole discussion in book 7, which is a discussion about the educational curriculum for the guardians, which starts with the preliminary studies in mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and stereometry. Then let's say the practical training in guarding the city that needs to take place before a few selected guardians will also be introduced to the study of dialectics. And then, of course, the study of dialectics. So this entails knowledge of the forms, knowledge of the form of the good, and so on. So what Socrates is saying is that all of this must apply to women, to the women who have the befitting natures. And this means that there are women who have natures that are fit for studying dialectics, and therefore being on the top positions in the city and have knowledge of the forms. So this, of course, raises the issue of, then what kind of weakness are we, or inferiority are we talking about? Because, of course, it cannot be an inferiority that, even if at the level of the genus, that may preclude women's inclusion among philosopher rulers. Now, on some readings, it has been suggested, and I wish it were true, because it would be nice, nicer than the reality of what I think we have in the argument. It has been suggested that what Socrates has in mind is only physical strength. So that what he has in mind is that female bodies are by and large weaker, but this doesn't have any impact on intellectual or moral abilities. Now, I don't think this works, because of what we find in text number 7. So going back to that, Socrates says, "Do you know of any human pursuits in which the male sex does not rank above the female sex in all of these respects?" Now, what are all of these respects? They are the respects listed in text number 6 from the handout. And this doesn't have to do just with the physical strength. It has to do with intellectual abilities, or at least with intellectual performance. So it has to do, learning with ease, having intellectual autonomy, and so on. Furthermore, so this, in my view, excludes the idea that the respect, that what Socrates has in mind is only bodily weakness. Something must happen to the soul within the context of female embodiment. So the way I propose to understand this point is this. We saw in text number 6 that the body needs to serve adequately thought. Now, this may mean several things. So first of all, it needs to be fit enough for fit in the appropriate way for the kind of activity in which people will engage. But if we take into account the discussion of physical training and medicine from book 3, it can also mean further things, which is that sickness, bodies that are prone to sickness or that are unstable may constitute an hindrance to the good exercise of reason. And this may be seen, for example, from text 407 BC from book 3, where we find a criticism of a certain kind of medicine that it is not, doesn't really focus on prevention, but rather on therapy. And which basically, why? Because people who get too obsessed with their health and taking care of their bodies are finding this, are distracted, let's say, from the intellectual pursuits that their souls should pursue. So, and then in text 410 BE from book 3, we also find the claim that the physical training Socrates is describing there for the guardians is for the sake of the soul, which indicates that a certain state of the body does have an impact on the state of the soul. In that context, the discussion is about how to harmonize thumos and reason, and therefore physical training must be such as to develop thumos in the proper way, but without making thumos too aggressive, without making it too weak, making it harmonious with reason, and so on. So going back to our problem, then my suggestion is this. Socrates probably believes that female embodiment is an inferior embodiment. He may be influenced by Hippocratic medicine in this, and the point that Hippocratic doctors were making that women's bodies have an excess of moist. They also have the problem of the wandering womb, and therefore are more prone to instability and to sickness. So it's not just a matter of physical strength. There may be like exceptionally strong women, or particularly strong women, or women who are strong than the average man. But female embodiment may have because of the sexual apparatus and the level of moistness and so on, may be prone to more instability. To translate this, we may think that what Socrates has in mind, although this is not clear in the text because he never speaks about in these terms about pregnancy, but what he may have in mind that pregnancy is maybe a hindrance, not only in the sense that there are some physical tasks that women could not perform while pregnant because of physical bodily impediment, but also that during pregnancy, the dianoia could be impacted by the pregnancy for a short period of time, and so this would be, let's say, distracting from the study of arithmetic or geometry or astronomy and so on. And so from this viewpoint, let's say that female embodiment is an inferior embodiment that does, and insofar as the body needs to be a tool for dianoia, and a tool for the soul, a weaker or inferior embodiment will have an impact also on the ability of the soul to realize its natural potential. But at the level of the soul, there is no sexual difference. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is that the soul for Socrates is sexless, and this is clear from the myth of Air and the logic of reincarnation in the myth of Air, because souls can be reincarnated in the opposite sex from the previous life. So the soul is sexless. The body does have sexual difference in terms of strength, but also in terms of greater inclination to sickness or to instability. This sexual difference of the body does have some comparative, let's say, negative effects on the soul's ability to realize its natural potential. So at the level of the soul, there is no sexual difference whatsoever. And so women included into the class of guardians may, by and large, have exactly the same kind of natural potential at the level of the soul. But because of the embodiment, they may have some more obstacles in realizing this potential at all times, and so on. And it may also be the case that, I mean, this is, of course, a speculative reconstruction, that this would be less of a problem once women have past their reproductive age. And so there would be not even this problem in the case of the study of dialectics, because the study of dialectics would start much later, and the political rule of the city would begin after, you know, the reproductive age is passed, and so on. So we may even think that at that point there would be not even a sexual impediment, sorry, a bodily impediment to whatsoever, or a comparative disadvantage as a genus within the realm of, you know, the study of dialectics, and then politically ruling the city. So just to give you the summary, and then we can start the discussion. So the way I understand what is going on in the text is the natural vocation for the administration of the city are judged first and foremost on features that pertain to the soul. The soul is sexless, and therefore male or female superiority as a genus is not existent at this level, because there is no genus. There is no male or female genus. The soul is embodied. While souls are unsexed, bodies are differentiated by sex, and women's bodies are weaker and more prone to disease. Bodies are the tools of the anoia, and weaker bodies are therefore weaker tools, or even can be even hindrances. And the relative inferiority of the female sex results from their soul's differential embodiment. So it emerges that at the level of, let's say, of the soul-body compound, rather than at the level of the soul, the disembodied soul as such. At the same time, we need to take into account that all this claim applies to the level of the genus, not to the level of individuals. And this means that in any case, various talents will need to be addressed only on an individual basis. They will not be addressed at the basis of the genus. So this is what this is the way I try to read to make the argument, let's say, more sound, philosophically or logically. As I said at the beginning, whether this is satisfactory from a feminist perspective is a very different matter, which I will discuss in my book. Like, the final chapter is going to be on precisely a feminist assessment of the Socratics and Plato's arguments, but also dealing with the feminist debate, the feminist readings of Plato. I must say that I find, just to, you know, disclaim what part of what I think, at least, is that I find the question that you know, emerged from even among ancient philosophy scholars from Blasto's famous article, whether, you know, about Plato's feminism in the Republic. I think the question is the wrong question. So in other words, I take it for granted that this is not a feminist argument at all. And I take it for granted based on an understanding I have of what feminism is. Insofar as, for me, we can understand in feminist theory only in its relation to practice. So feminism is both a practice, a political practice, and a process of subjectivation and struggle, and you know, and it is a political theory and philosophical theory that is in constant dialogue with this practice. So for me, we may, you know, assess whether, from a feminist viewpoint, an argument is more, you know, palatable than another, but we cannot assess whether Plato's argument is feminist, because of course it is not, because there was no feminist movement. Women had not subjectivized themselves as a political agent or a political actor, except in Aristophanes' Thesmophoria Zeus. So it's only in fiction that women become a political agent, or in Lysistrata, but we don't have any evidence whatsoever that there was any form of political subjectivation of women in the context of Athens. And so what we are dealing with, by and large, with the exception probably of Aspasia, is theories about women elaborated by men, but not in response to a women's movement, not in dialogue with a process of subjectivation of women. So I'm not saying that men cannot make feminist arguments, but what I'm arguing is that feminist arguments have emerged historically on the basis of a process of political struggle and political subjectivation. So I think that the question was misplaced and has led to, in my view, an array of unsatisfactory interpretation of the Republic. So we may lift a bit of the pressure on the text by, not expecting any feminist argument, and we can still assess it from a feminist perspective in the sense of, but this will require us also to take into account the historical context in which the argument is made. And from this viewpoint, what I'm going to say in the book is that, of course, we are not dealing with feminist arguments, but in the context of debates, in philosophical debates and cultural debates in Athens in the 5th and 4th century, what the Socratics were doing, including Plato, was actually quite interesting. And in fact, there is some, let's say, emancipatory aspect in their emphasis on the soul over the body, because this enabled them to, make claims that were pretty crazy from the viewpoint of the cultural beliefs in Athens, which is that, women can have courage, Andrea, or that women can have political virtue, that women can be rulers, and so on. And so from a feminist perspective, what I find particularly interesting is that in terms of the feminist debate, is that this may challenge an all too common idea that, let's say, mind-body dualism, or let's say emphasis on the soul over the body, is the origin of all evils. So of all misogynistic beliefs about women, and that therefore by rediscovering the positivity of embodiment, in fact, we make a step forward. It is possible that we make a step forward, but in historical terms, it is actually the moment in which the Socratics started, elaborating a strong notion of the soul and claiming that arete is a property of the soul. It doesn't have to do with status. It doesn't have to do with physical markers and so on. That they could also start imagining that, in fact, women could acquire Andrea and could acquire exactly the same virtues as men. Okay, let's stop here. Let's stop sharing the screen.
I'm going to take over from Tristan as the moderator of the discussion and the Q&A that follows. I will open up the floor to questions, and we will adopt our usual process, which is to put the letter Q in the chat, and that way I can manage the order of priority. Let me just, if I can, just quickly jump in first, taking that privilege, and just at the end of your paper there, what you're saying, I think, is absolutely quite correct, and it reminds me, in parallel, of the way in which we think about Aristotle's reflections on the economy, and that to say that Plato is a feminist would be the equivalent of or parallel to saying something like Aristotle is an economist or understands the economy. There can be no economy until the 18th and 19th century. There can be no feminism until the emergence of a different kind of human subject, that is the subject within capitalism, right, to some extent.
Or the French Revolution.
Yeah, or the French Revolution. Oh, sure, the liberal subject, exactly. And so therefore, that throws the question back into antiquity, and to say, well, what is the human subject in antiquity, right? I mean, how does that, in what kind of framework does that arise? just and the other thing I'll say too is because I have a very great interest in Aspasia, and I'm working at the moment on putting together the basics of a source book on Aspasia, which I think is a real something that to be desired in the next for students and for wider public, just to a complete analysis of all of the sources on Aspasia. And you mentioned her as a possible exception to this political subjectivization. But of course she isn't, right? Because she's only a subject insofar as she's an outsider. She's a metic, she's from Miletus, she's an aristocrat. She even belongs to the realm of the gods, according to the old comic poets. She's Hera to Pericles, Zeus, and so on. And so Aspasia is really just the complete anomaly, isn't she? Right? I mean, just so anomalous in that regard, that she becomes this fascinating figure within the early Socratics, particularly Aeschines. It's a shame we don't have his dialogue about her, but in any case, wonderful thoughts and wonderful ideas that I completely agree with wholeheartedly. So let's turn to people with legitimate questions. And that is Jack, you first, and then Emma, you're next.
Thanks so much for that, Cinzia. My question is about well, first of all, I want to say I think that you're largely right. I agree with the conclusion that you draw, but I do wonder about the framing of the whole of Book 5 as this kind of how much of this interesting Socratic stuff that you mentioned at the end is Glaucon really capable of taking as a way of thinking about the problem in T9 when with what in all pursuits man partakes, although in all women is weaker than man, because I note that that's also the same ending that Glaucon gives the watchdog analogy that precedes the first wave, and there Socrates doesn't either agree or disagree with it. Socrates just sort of moves on with the argument. He gives the watchdog analogy, and it's Glaucon that adds the bit of, oh yes, we would treat the female and male watchdogs the same, except we would treat the male ones as stronger and the female ones as weaker. And Socrates just moves on from there, and we get the setup. And so part of me does wonder whether or not that inclusion at the end of T9, even though in all reality, as I said, your eventual conclusions I think are right if we think of stuff like the Timaeus and other problems of embodiment that emerged throughout Socratic practice. But I do wonder in this context whether the inclusion of woman being weaker than man the second time at the conclusion of the argument is sort of for Glaucon's benefit, because Socrates, as you note, it's all of this sort of language of trial. Socrates seems to be careful about what he's saying in this specific context. So I just wonder how much of this is Socrates tailoring it so that Glaucon will accept some version of it.
Yeah, no, this is an interpretation that's been given. And actually, when I started working on the text, this is what I had in mind. But then I became, working through the arguments, I became persuaded that it cannot be just that. Because, I mean, it would be like, maybe Socrates is trying to meet Glaucon where Glaucon is. But the issue is that he's actually making this work argumentatively. And it's not, there is no point in which he seems to suggest to Glaucon that he may be wrong. And, he may meet Glaucon as where Glaucon is, but then, lead him further. But this is not what Socrates does. He just accepts Glaucon's premise that, there is some inferiority. So I thought, when I started, I mean, I don't exclude what you're saying, but let's say that I felt that when working on the text at some point that this would be an all too easy. So I'm, for a very charitable reading of the text, but I think we should not overdo it. So in other words, it would be a very easy way to solve the problem, you know, and then claim, no, but in fact, Socrates is not really committed to any belief about women's inferiority. Now, there is also the problem that, of course, it's not Socrates in the other dialogues, it's, you know, Timaeus, and it is the Athenian, but we do find claims about the inferiority of the female genus both in the laws and in the Timaeus. And so my reading, by the way, was also inspired by the discussion about women's nature in the Economicus by Xenophon. Because the way I reconstructed the discussion is that Xenophon is, you know, is giving a version once again of the theory that, you know, women's nature is by and large has the same ability for virtue as men's nature, and there are no specialized female nature, you know, contrary to what Aristotle would claim or what Meno was claiming in the Gorgias and so on. And so, you know, Sophrosyne means the same thing for men and women, Andrea as well, and wisdom and self-control, most importantly for Xenophon, means the same thing. At the same time, he does say that that there is a bodily inferiority, you know, that women's bodies, and actually, like in this sense, is actually even more critical of women's bodies. Women's bodies do not equip them to do outdoor work or to face dangers. And I think, and he also makes the claim that women are more prone to fear. Comparatively, which doesn't mean that they cannot develop Andrea in general, but they, you know, comparatively more prone to fear. Now, the way I try to make sense of that, even in the case of Xenophon, was to think that, well, this, you know, if it is the case that Xenophon agrees with the general Socratic tenet, and is, you know, and we also find the passage in the Symposium about women's nature not being inferior. Maybe what Xenophon has in mind is that because they have weaker bodies, this you know, weaker embodiment will have some impact on the soul when embodied, in the sense that they will be more prone to fear because they're less, you know, they're weaker. They can defend themselves less, and they also have less, you know, opportunities to develop the virtue of Andrea, because their bodily inferiority doesn't equip them to participate in war. So something similar logic, I thought applies here in book 5, but with the difference that actually here at least Socrates doesn't believe that the weakness of women's bodies is such as to exclude them from the public sphere, and actually wants women to be in the public sphere.
Makes me think of women in Xenophon's Lacedaemonian constitution as well.
Yeah.
Emma, you're next in the line.
Hi. Thanks so much, Cinzia, for your wonderful paper. And really, I find your argument completely unimpeachable. But I suppose, you know, I wanted to push you a little bit on this, you know, this question of the soul, because the soul is a complicated thing for Plato, and its imbrication with the body is quite, you know, if we think about the tripartite soul, and especially perhaps the appetitive part of the soul, and how, you know, there's a constant agonism going on, you know, within the soul / body around, you know, whether mastery can take place over the appetites and so on. And, you know, we see so clearly in the earlier books of the Republic how Socrates and Plato value a kind of a unmovable body versus a body that is prone to change and being moved, right? Being affected, especially, and you were just saying, you know, prone to fear, but also prone to, you know, crying and, you know, a lack of Sophrosyne, which seems to have both bodily and you know, a soul-related dimension to it, and of course, you know, which also is relevant in terms of the doctrine of reincarnation. Right. I mean, I was looking as you were talking at this passage in the Republic, in the Timaeus, when he's talking about the successive reincarnations in from a man's body to a woman and then into an animal body. And he says, and this is 42c, and he would have no rest from these toilsome transformations until he had dragged that massive accretion of fire, water, air, earth into the conformity with the revolution of the same and uniform within him, and so subdued that turbulent, irrational mass by means of reason. So I really appreciate your argument about the separation of soul and body. And of course, the soul does have this capacity ultimately. And I think that is, you're absolutely correct that it's sexless. But I just want to push you a little bit around this, this question of this sort of internal agonism. And I think the very clear sexness of that agonism.
Yeah. Okay, so staying with the Republic first. So there are several passages, and this is also one of the reasons why uncharitable readings of the argument of the first wave have been given, because the Republic is disseminated with passages that dismiss women. And especially, as you said, in book 2 and 3, you know, like one should not impersonate female characters. One should not allow for lamentations, and women are presented precisely as more prone to emotionality, but also appetitive desires. However, these are all passages that refer to a specific social and cultural context. So the way I interpret them is that Socrates is speaking about, Athenian women. And he probably believes that, in fact, Athenian women are by and large bad, like appetitive and emotional and so on. But this may well be the effect of the kind of very bad socialization to which they are subjected. So the fact that they are excluded from the public sphere, that they're not educated, are not physically trained. So it is the fact that they are relegated to the private sphere, and the private sphere is the sphere that is intimately connected with the appetitive part of the soul and appetites. The fact that being, relegated to the private sphere mostly, with the exception of some, religious festivals and so on, actually ends up, or putting them in charge of the household budget and so on, ends up basically training their souls in very negative ways, in the sense of empowering the appetitive part of the soul, not only in women who do have already by nature an appetitive inclination, but also in women who don't, maybe are more thymoides or more philosophical or rational. But the fact that they receive this kind of very bad socialization that is all centered around the private sphere unavoidably increases the appetitive, gives more power to the appetitive part of the soul. And I think this because I do think that in the Republic, there is a clear distinction between, nature and nurture, in the sense that one can have even a philosophical soul, but because of corruption within the city, end up a tyrant. So a very appetitive, erotic, sexually erotic person. So, the education can pervert the natural potential of the soul and make more dominant parts of the soul that would not naturally be the dominant parts in that person. Now, with respect to the Timaeus, so I'm leaving the Timaeus for last because that's the most problematic argument for me. I must say, I'm not trying to make, I'm not trying to show that there is a unified theory of women in Plato's dialogues. I think different dialogues are exploring the issue of women's nature from different angles. Because I'm not so sure that the argument that Timaeus, because in the Timaeus, the argument about incarnation is also that, this the female incarnation in a female body is the second incarnation which is destined to, souls that have acted unjustly or cowardly in the previous life. Now, unless one thinks that this has no bearing on the soul on the second incarnation, so that there is no mark of this vice on the soul in the second incarnation, I don't see this as compatible, very compatible with the inclusion of women into the guardian class, because they really need to have very good soul, like souls with a very, very with the next impressive talent for courage and justice, obviously. So this is something I will have to think about. But I don't really have problems with thinking that we should also give up the idea that there is a unified, coherent theory across dialogues. It may be that is actually tackling the issue from exploring different possibilities, let's say.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I have my own ideas about why in the Republic there is this very particular, it's very striking, and unusual, the argument he makes in these passages. And, I suppose for me, the question is sort of why. And I think I'm writing my own book about this, but just in a nutshell, I think it's because the reproductive function, the genealogical function has been taken over, and this frees up a certain kind of new woman to emerge.
No, I totally agree. Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Our next question comes from Marguerite.
Thanks a lot for the paper. It's really interesting to me, and I agree with a lot of it, although I think I disagree with you and Ben about when we can say feminism starts, but that's another issue. The question I wanted to ask is about the body, and what exactly about the body you think Plato might have thought was weaker in women, because you mentioned a number of different things. You gestured at Plato possibly being influenced by Hippocratic sources, but you also spoke about pregnancy and gestation. And it seems to me later on, there's actually much later on, there's a lot of debate about just what it might be about women's bodies that, so people who want to grant that the souls, at least the rational souls of men and women, are the same, nonetheless want to dispute that women are the equals of men just because of these bodies. So, but then the question becomes, what exactly is it about the body? And maybe this connects, though I'm not sure about this, but maybe it connects to Emanuela's question in the sense that different aspects of the body might interfere with the function of different parts of the soul. So if you could just say really this is just could you say some more about what you think it is about the body that might interfere with? And maybe also if you could comment on the language of that passage, because it's so, I don't have the Greek here, but the line is that the body of the one adequately served his thought, while the body of the other opposed his, which it strikes me now is quite interesting, because that doesn't seem like you would expect it to be adequately served or doesn't adequately serve, but opposed seems much stronger. So if you have anything more to say on those points, I'd be really interested.
Yeah, no, these are excellent questions. So I think I need to do more work on Hippocratic medicine and probably feel more the details of how this may work. But what I had in mind is, on the one hand, strength may be an issue. So, but it's probably not just strength and weakness. I think it has to do with the reproductive apparatus and what this entails for women's bodies. In the Timaeus, we do find the theory of the wandering womb. This may or may not indicate that, Plato endorsed it implicitly also in the Republic. It's a possibility. if this is the case, then let's say the sexual apparatus of women does produce some problems in terms of really sickness, like making women's body sick, unstable, and so requiring more care, medical attention, and this may be an obstacle. I will probably need to flesh this out more based on Hippocratic text. So far, what I've been thinking was more translating into what we may think about this issue, which is, well, hormones may have an impact on memory, as I'm experimenting right now, or like certain quickness in thinking, in certain, it's not a permanent state. It comes and goes and so on. But it is, from this viewpoint, I would not be totally hostile to what Socrates is claiming, in the sense that, there are some specific problems that women have to face because of different body. There is also more endurance. There are also, but it is the case as a certain kind of embodiment can have an effect in terms of the ability of exercise, intellectual abilities at given moments. So memory loss or things like this. And so this may be something of what Socrates may have in mind, or let's say like hormonal fluctuations within the month. Some women are subject to very, very, very bad hormonal fluctuations that do have an enormous effect on mood, concentration, and so on. And it may be that, because these are arguments based on induction, so experience, it may be that based on observation, one could see that in fact, there were these issues. One could not explain them easily. Then, therefore, the theory of the wandering womb or some other like strange theory about women's bodies. But I do not find this is what I find also problematic in a certain feminist interpretation of the text, critique of the text, like Adriana Cavarero, the French feminist debate. Because there is an emphasis of this, power, the power of reproduction in women as something that is inherently positive. And I think this doesn't take into account that actually it may not be that positive for many women. Certainly in the context of Athens, it was not, death at childbirth and all possible problems. But it is also, it's also not the case that all women or all people, feel good about their bodies, and that all women feel good about their, their hormonal fluctuations and so on. So from this viewpoint, I think there is a bit of too much romanticism about, let's say, this positivity of the female body that may have played an important role in the feminist debate at some point, but I think one needs to take with some caution today, I think. What was the other question? Because I forgot it was yes, the adequacy. Sorry, I'm talking too long in my responses. 455 before. Okay. C1. Yeah, ikanos is the Greek term. So it must be sufficient, adequate. So again, it's not a matter of, and I take it to be like adequacy to the specific task. So I would say, somebody who has a talent for medicine doesn't need to be necessarily particularly strong. But, somebody who is more inclined to farming, let's say, may need, a certain level of physical fitness, strength, and endurance, because it's a matter of, hard work, low technology, and so on. So it really depends. The adequacy depends on the task, basically. So it's not necessarily like about having the most fit body. And in fact, you know, there is also criticism in the discussion of physical training in book 3 about, you know, the athletic training, which overdevelops muscles or certain kind of muscles and so on. That's not a good model. You know, for the guardians, it's not a matter of becoming like terribly muscled. It is a matter of harmonizing the body and harmonizing the body with the soul.
So it's a kind of threshold.
It's a threshold,
He kind of
yes.
suggests there's a kind of threshold of it. Okay.
I mean,
Thanks
like,
a lot.
if we take into account also the eugenic, the unfortunate eugenic part of you know, the second wave, yes, probably the thought is, you know, also like, in order to perform some task, you cannot have certain kinds of disability, and so in order to perform the role of guardians, you cannot, you know, the body must be functional in all of its aspects at the very least, because you need to be able to do the physical training, to go to war, to defend the city, and so on. So let's say blindness would probably not be entirely comparable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Andre, you are next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Cinzia. So I haven't been convinced by the interpretation you gave of it's your text T8, right?
Yeah.
So this is 55D 2 to 5. So I haven't been convinced, but that the sentence, which is crucial for you, about women being very gifted in many things, must be restricted to civic life or civic virtues or whatever. And the reason why I am not convinced is that it seems to me that it takes up what Socrates says in C6, when he says, we are not going to macrologe. So the idea that there are many, many things that could be added to weaving and to cooking. And so the many, many things, the many superiorities of women may extend beyond these two techni, no? And the second point is that it seems to me that Glaucon's argument is actually not, or Glaucon's remark is actually not taken up by Socrates. And it's not taken up because it seems to me that Glaucon remains vague. He says, os epos eipein, and he says, tode holon. And you have a very strong interpretation. So tode holon, you say it's generic as opposed to the individuals. I am not sure of that, because it could mean tode holon generally speaking. If it means generally speaking, it's like, you know, making softer the affirmation, but it's not saying anything that is really strong thesis. So that's my hunch. I'm not sure of that, but I think it's you would have to say something about this. Then, in Socrates' answer is more interesting, because on the one hand, he says, homoios dies parmenai physeis, and you have an interesting plural here. The natures of women, and that must be the natures of individual women, or men, actually. So the natures are dispersed over both sexes.
Yes.
So this could be a sentence that goes in your direction. But at the end, he says epipasi de astenestero. And it would be, you know, more adequate for you, or more stronger for your thesis if epipaside could mean the same thing as to the holon, but it does not. Epipasi means in every kinds of activity, the woman is okay. Women are weaker. So so that's, it seems to me that it's more unidirectional than you want the text to be. And then if you take 56a 20, which I think you don't, 20 and 21, which you don't comment, I think, or you do not have on your handout. What it seems to say is two things. They have the same fuses, women, and so they have the same fuses, but this does not impede that some are weaker and some are stronger.
What is the text? Sorry.
So kai gunaikos ara kai andros heote fusis. 56a10.
10. Okay. Yes.
So we have the same fuses, right? It's
yeah.
But there is a small problem of text in the next line, which is interesting. I think that probably it's not decisive. And but in spite of the fact that we have the same fuses, there is a difference of degree. So the conclusion is that it's not because you have the same fuses that you have the same degree of fuses. And the whole thing implies that, and what Socrates seems to be legitimately conclude from that, it's not because you have a variation of degree within the same fuses that you must not be submitted to the same education. That and this is what I take the argument to be, which is not quite what you develop, right? So at least it's a suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, so let me defend my reading. So in between 455 C5 and and E1, I think it is clear that we are speaking about the genus, because it's not just the toholon in Glaucon. So Socrates already speaks about genus, toton andron genus at C6, and then D1 to Gynaikeon genus. So he has already presented this as a discussion about the genus, not individuals. And then Glaucon also says to genus. So I connect, I take toholon to refer to the genus, because there is all this emphasis on, genus appears, I don't know, 4 or 5 times in a few lines. Yeah. And so I take the toholon refers to genus at line 4, D4. I think, I mean,
but if I may interrupt you, you have Gunaikes mentoi polai, so
yes.
so it's a restriction.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's a restriction.
No, this is the way I interpret it. So he says, yes, he agrees that the genus, one genus, crateita over the other genus in every activity. Okay. Then he says, Gynaikes pollai, so many individual women, this is how I read it, are better than many individual men, pollon, andron, at many activities. So he's making, this is why I think he's making a distinction between, because the first language he uses is the language of genus. Then he uses the plural, which I take it that indicates that he's speaking about the individuals here. And so this is why I take him to say that Socrates is right. And of course, Glaucon likes this argument that as a genus, men are superior. But it is also the case empirically that we have seen many women excelling over, many individual women excelling over individual men in many activities. So I do think that if one pays attention to the language, actually, like I do have a strong case for this, for interpreting the text as making a distinction between genus and individuals. The other thing that you were asking is, objecting is that Glaucon is not necessarily speaking of public activities alone. It is true that Glaucon's intervention is vague. I agree with this. So I'm reading into, in order to make my claim, I need to connect what Glaucon's intervention to Socrates' or warning line C7, what you already mentioned, that we shouldn't macrologane about this irrelevant stuff. And the irrelevant stuff, so the reason why I think that he's not is indicating we should stay on the public sphere is that already earlier in response to the heuristic objection, he said that one needs to gauge whether the existing sexual difference is relevant from the viewpoint of the administration guarding and ruling the city. So you already framed the whole discussion as we need to focus on this problem, that this is what is at stake. And then he's repeating again that we shouldn't macrologane about these activities. And the activities he mentions are the activities of the private sphere. So these are the activities women would perform in the household. And Socrates is not interested in discussing this. So it may be the case that, Glaucon is a bit obtuse and wants to, insist on saying, well, but in the private sphere, both, women, many women excel. Or it may be the case that Glaucon is an intelligent interlocutor and he accepts the warning of Socrates, but he's making the point, well, but still, even I'm obviously supplementing the text because I agree with you that it's vague, but I'm reading this passage in dialogue with what comes before. And Socrates' warning, and also Socrates' framing of the whole discussion as a discussion about public, political, and war-related activities. Then on the issue of degrees, actually, I should have mentioned this because this is actually part of my argument. And I totally agree with you that the crucial conclusion is at 456.10 and 11 when 8, 10, and 11 when he says that because this is the passage that makes clear that we have proved that there is not a distinction in kind in terms of male and female genus. There is a distinction, if they can have the same nature, then obviously like souls of producers will have the same nature in both men and women. Souls of auxiliaries will have the same nature and so on. But then there can be degrees, and the degrees can be only gauged at the individual level. So they can only be tested at an individual level. I totally agree with this. So actually, this was my mistake because I should have included this text in the. But the issues, the reason why I focused on the previous passages is that these are the passages that cause most problems in interpretations. In other words, the conclusion Socrates reaches both, in text number 9 and in these lines you refer to, appear to many interpreters unwarranted by the previous arguments, basically. And so probably what I need to make clear also in the written version of the paper is that in fact they are warranted by the, if you reconstruct the argument as I suggested, then they are warranted because what is at stake is precisely a matter of degrees. but we can make this claim only after we have shown that there is no difference in kind. No, there is a difference in kind among various natures, like appetitive, soft, but then within these kinds, there is no distinction, sexual distinction in nature. Yeah.
No, I don't want to monopolize. It just seems to me that there are two, that your argument becomes stronger, and I agree with it. I agree with the conclusion. I think I don't agree with the argument as you, but it's not important. But what seems to me important is that one can say that there is an ambiguity in Socrates' use of fuses. Because when we say we are equal, we have the same fuses. Yes, we have the same fuses, and no, we don't have the same fuses, depending on whether you admit or not that having the same fuses does not exclude degrees. And this is I think it's clarifying the debate, actually, because it seems to me that in the debate, the two levels are confused, and of course this distinction is not made explicitly, but it's the conclusion that you must draw from a right reconstruction of the argument, as I understand it.
Okay. No, you're right about this. And I must say, like, that the fuses as degrees it's quite clear also from the discussion about guardians, because there are, and also in the second wave, some will be like more, braver and more effective at war, and will get rewards, and then they will be able to reproduce more often, and so on. So clearly there are degrees even among the men. So yeah, thank you.
We have a final question from Elise.
Hello. You ever feel like you listen to people speaking and you think, yeah, I've got all these questions, and you're like, I've forgotten what I was going to ask. So thank you so much for your paper. I'm currently in like a pre-menopausal brain fog moment myself, and it's 2:15 here in Athens. So bear with me while I try and figure out what I'm actually saying. When I was listening to your paper, it made me think so much about this idea of commonality that comes out so much in this, the formation of a guardian class. And as Jack mentioned in his first question, when Socrates starts talking about this idea of the phylakes that include the male and the female dogs, he brings up the question like, oh, the male and the female dogs, they can both do these things, but do we expect then female dogs to be kept indoors as though they're incapacitated? And he says like hos adunatos, like as though they're effectively like disabled, because they bear and rear puppies while the males work and take care of the flock. And then like to introduce that case, he brings up the concept of like communality, community property, all of the things of people like working together. And so bear with me. But I always felt like they're just kind of like working through this reality that, even female dogs are technically capable of doing these things, but they have moments when they might need to go and redirect their focus elsewhere and their bodies elsewhere as well. But that still benefits the common group. And so they're adunatos for a time, despite the fact that core drive and capacity is still observed there, like before or after. And so I've always kind of read that section as being like Socrates asking, is it then right in an ideal polis to exclude women from work that they could feasibly do, but for a time they have to go and do these other things, which are also crucial for the continuation of a guardian class as well. So that was what I was thinking, and I've now lost a question because I was too busy talking. But it's just, it's got me thinking, so thank you.
No, but I completely agree with you. And this is actually a topic I'm going to address, especially in the next chapter on the Republic, on the second wave, because there the argument I want to make is that on the one hand, there is this concern for koinonia. And clearly the private family is an enormous problem that also in the Republic, and it doesn't at least in the Republic it does, the maintenance of the private family would make impossible the realization of the perfect city and so on, because again the private family is
a purpose-bred class.
Yes. That's and it also like emphasizes appetitive desires, and also tumors can get attached to the wrong but I do think that another part of the argument, and there is a line that now I don't have in mind the numbers, there is another part of the argument which has to do really with the fact that the only way we can include the women in the public sphere is if we liberate them from the bonus of rearing children. And this is because at some point Glaucon tells Socrates, you're making the job of the bonus of rearing children very easy for the women on the guardian class. And Socrates responds, yeah, rightly so. And this so I do think there is, in a sense, social reproductive argument there, in the sense that, I mean, the necessity of taking care of children and doing all this really demanding work, which was relegated to women, basically makes it very hard to focus to play a role in the public sphere. And by the way, this is no, okay, I scrap this. And so I totally agree with you. So, but I think I'm going to develop this more in the context of the discussion of the second wave.
Amazing. Thanks for listening to my premenopausal rambles. Much appreciated.
Yeah, totally sympathize.
All right. Well, I think unless there are further questions, Tristan, no question from you. That's
I have questions, but I've been enjoying listening to other people's questions for a change.
Good for you.
I'm definitely not going to hold anyone back further, least of all Cinzia.
Well, why don't we now, though, draw the proceedings to a close? It's coming up almost to 2 hours since Cinzia has joined us on Zoom, and it's getting late in the evening there, and she's also probably hungry and tired. So let's perhaps let's give her a round of applause again, and thank her very warmly.
Thank you for the great discussion questions.
Well,
and Ben, we need to talk about Aspasia, because I'm giving a paper in December on Aspasia, and I'm really happy that you said she was an aristocrat, because this is one of the things I'm going to claim.
Well, I mean, we could.
She was an aristocrat even in Socratic writings, so that none
of course. I mean, this idea that she was a hetaira and that she was a brothel keeper is just old comic wind up. Yeah. I have a paper. I have an article coming out next year on Lysicles, Aspasia, and their comic son Poristes, and the way in which the Socratics represent demagogia, and the way that Aspasia features as the teacher of demagogues, right?
Exactly.
I think what needs to happen with Aspasia first is that we need to get all the sources out into the light of day with commentary, and then we can begin afresh to think about what she is, irrespective of who she is. But amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But I'll send you that piece. But look, anyway, enough about Aspasia. Thanks again, and thanks for bringing to a close our Critical Antiquities workshop for the year. And again, I have to thank my colleague Tristan, who's done, as always, the lion's share of the work with organising the workshop. So thanks to Tristan, without which this would not be possible. And I hope you all have a great rest of the year, and Merry Christmas.
Yep.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. Lovely paper, Cinzia. Thank you.
Au revoir and arrivederci.
And goodbye.